The name of Odysseus has long been associated with wisdom, cunning, and an unyielding desire to return home. He was one of the brightest heroes of Greek mythology, renowned since the Trojan War. It was he who devised the cunning strategy that entered history, the wooden horse, a gift within which Greek warriors were concealed. Troy fell, and all the Greeks celebrated victory. But for Odysseus and his companions, the true struggle was only beginning. He dreamed of returning to Ithaca, the island he had left many years before. There his faithful wife, Penelope, awaited him, weaving her cloth by night and unraveling it by day to avoid marrying persistent suitors. There his son, Telemachus, grew, barely remembering his father. For any other man, returning home might have seemed an ordinary task, but not for one whom the gods themselves had chosen to test. The journey home was to become a symbol of all human trials. Odysseus did not yet know that storms, monsters, betrayals, and temptations awaited him, that he would lose his friends, yet again and again gather the remnants of his strength to press on. This was his mission, not only to return, but to prove that human will is stronger than the fate imposed by the gods. The sea in Greek mythology was never just water. It was alive, a force that could cradle or destroy. For mortals, it was both a path and a trial. For the gods, an arena of power. Among all lords of the elements, the most unpredictable was Poseidon, master of the ocean depths. And Odysseus had dealt him the gravest insult a mortal could. He blinded his son, the giant cyclops Polyphemus. What for a man was an act of heroism, for a god was an unforgivable offense. As Odysseus' ships set sail from the shore, the sea transformed at once. Waves rose like mountains, the sky grew heavy with dark clouds, and lightning split the heavens. Poseidon lifted his trident and tore through the waters, conjuring storms that ripped masts from their roots, shredded sails, and scattered ships across the sea. Warriors clung to ropes, fighting for balance, but even the most seasoned sailors were powerless before the fury of a god. Every wave struck like a blow, every gust of wind like a test. Odysseus stood firm on the deck, gripping the helm, his eyes ablaze. He understood this was no accident of nature, but a punishment that would follow him through his whole journey home. Deep within, he felt that Poseidon would not let him go so easily. And yet, he resolved to fight on, even if it meant challenging a god himself. After long days of battling the storm, the ships at last drifted to a quiet shore. Before the sailors' eyes stretched a land that seemed like paradise. No tempests, no war, only warm sunlight, green meadows, and a strange people, the lotus eaters, who lived in harmony with nature. They welcomed the strangers with smiles and offered them fruits of a wondrous plant, the lotus. The taste was sweet, tender, and infused with the very essence of forgetfulness. Those who ate no longer desired anything. They forgot the sea, the battles, their homeland. Their eyes grew vacant, their smiles carefree. Odysseus recoiled in horror when he saw his warriors, men who only yesterday would have followed him into the fiercest fight, now sitting idly beneath trees, staring at the sky, refusing to return to the ships. Gathering all his strength and resolve, he was forced to drag them back by hand, to call them to memory, to duty, to the love of family awaiting them at home. It was one of the first lessons of the journey. The greatest danger may not lie in enemy swords or the wrath of gods, but in the sweet, seductive oblivion that robs a man of his will. Odysseus understood then. His mission was not only to be a leader, but a guardian of memory and the will of his men. He could not let them surrender, even when their hearts longed for the easy path. And so he compelled them to sail on. Sailing onward, Odysseus' ships reached a land where everything seemed wild and primeval. There were no cities, no temples, no laws. Only caves in the mountains and endless fields where enormous figures roamed. This was the land of the Cyclopes, one-eyed, mighty sons of the gods, who lived without rules and knew only strength. Odysseus, with a handful of warriors, dared to enter the cave of one of them, Polyphemus. Inside they found sheepskins, cheese, milk, and signs of the master, though the giant himself was absent. The sailors, hungry and exhausted, began to feast on the stores. But when evening came and the owner returned, The ground shook beneath his steps, and the cave itself seemed too small for his immense body. Polyphemus sealed the entrance with a boulder no dozen men could move, and it became clear they were trapped. At dawn, the monster seized several men and devoured them mercilessly. Odysseus, horrified, watched the dreadful scene, but instead of despair, his mind worked faster than ever. He devised a plan. When night fell, he offered Polyphemus wine and gave his name as Nobody. The drunken giant soon collapsed into sleep, and the Greeks drove a sharpened, heated stake into his single eye. Polyphemus let out a terrible cry, calling for the aid of the other Cyclopes, but when they asked what had happened, he answered, "Nobody has wronged me." This moment became the symbol of human cunning, the triumph of wit over brute force. Odysseus and his men escaped the cave by clinging beneath the bellies of the sheep and made their way back to their ships. Yet as they sailed away, Odysseus could not resist boasting of his true name. That cry reached the ears of Poseidon, Polyphemus' father. From then on, the sea god swore an oath. He would do all he could to make the heroes return home nearly impossible. After the encounter with the Cyclops, the ships wandered the seas for a long time until they reached an island that seemed like a true wonder. Here lived Aeolus, lord of the winds, the one who ruled over all the currents of the air. His dwelling was fortified with bronze walls so that no wind could escape without his command. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus kindly, having heard of his bravery and wisdom. As a token of respect, he gave him a gift, a bag in which all the winds were bound, save one, the favorable breeze. As long as the bag remained closed, the ships would safely reach the shores of Ithaca. For a long time Odysseus guarded this gift, never opening it. But his men, unaware of its contents, grew suspicious. To them it seemed their leader was hiding treasure, gold or silver. And when at last the homeland shore was already in sight, the sailors, consumed by envy and distrust, untied the bag. In that instant, all the winds burst forth. The sky exploded with storm, and the ships were hurled back into the boundless waters. The warriors wept, for their carelessness and greed had cast them back to the beginning of their journey. Odysseus, however, stood in silence, watching as the horizon with the homeland's coast disappeared behind mountains of waves. This was a new trial, not only of strength but of trust. He realized that the greatest enemy may dwell not only in the depths of the ocean but also in the hearts of his own men. After the storm that had hurled them far from Ithaca, the ships came upon another island. At first glance, it seemed peaceful, green hills, narrow bays, and vast cities rising upon the slopes. Yet this land belonged to the Laestrygonians, giant cannibals who lived cruel lives under the law of brute force. At first, the sailors saw only a woman washing clothes by the water, but she led them into the city. There, instead of hospitality, a trap awaited. The Laestrygonians were twice the height of ordinary men and 10 times as strong. They seized the strangers and began tearing them apart before the eyes of those still alive. Stones rained down from the cliffs, crushing the ships, while spears and arrows rained upon the defenseless sailors. It was a dreadful battle with no chance of victory. Odysseus's entire fleet was destroyed. Only his own ship, the one he commanded, escaped the slaughter. The rest sank with their crews in the bloody waves of the bay. Then Odysseus grasped another truth. The path home would be a road of losses. He could not save everyone, but he had to save those who remained, and himself. For in their lives now lived not only the hope of returning but also the memory of those who would never again see their native shores. After the loss of nearly his entire fleet, Odysseus, with only a handful of surviving warriors, reached the mysterious island of Ithaca. There, deep within the thick forests, stood the palace of the enchantress Circe. She was a woman of wondrous beauty and terrifying power. Her eyes gleamed like polished gold, and her voice sounded like music that made one forget all the sorrows of the world. The weary sailors, broken by suffering and loss, entered her palace without fear. There they were met with fine dishes, wine, and sweet songs. Yet danger lurked in every cup. After drinking the potion, the men began to change. Their arms and legs shrank, their bodies grew covered with bristles, and human speech turned into grunts. Circe had transformed them into swine. Only Odysseus, aided by Hermes, escaped this trap. The god gave him a magical herb, moly, which neutralized the drink's power. When Odysseus raised his sword against the sorceress, she felt his strength and chose not to fight. From that moment, Odysseus and Circe became allies. She restored his men to their human form and even revealed to him secrets of the journey ahead. Yet their stay stretched on. A whole year the Greeks lived upon the island, forgetting their distant homes. Only when dreams of Penelope and Ithaca began to torment him did Odysseus gather his men and set sail once more. But now he faced a new task. Before he could find the way home, he had to descend into the realm of the dead. Circe's counsel was dreadful. To return home, Odysseus had to go where no living man should tread, into the realm of the dead, where Hades ruled. It was the most perilous of trials, for not all who entered the world of shadows ever returned. On a distant shore he performed the sacrifice. He slew a black ram, and its blood seeped into the earth, opening the gateway to the land of the departed. Then the shades of souls began to emerge from the darkness. They whispered, stretched out their hands, and sought to drink from the sacrificial pool. Among them were ancient heroes, great kings and warriors, and also his fallen companions. At last appeared the prophet Tiresias, the one he sought. His words were ominous. The road to Ithaca would be long and filled with new suffering. He warned Odysseus of the island of Helios, where the sacred cattle grazed. "Touch them not," said Tiresias, "and then you may yet see your home. But if anyone defies this, death will claim you all." Odysseus also heard the voice of his mother, who had died during his absence. Her shade spoke of Penelope's grief, of Ithaca waiting for its king, and of his son who had grown without knowing his father. These words pierced the hero's heart sharper than any sword. He left the underworld bearing both prophecy and unbearable sorrow. After returning from Circe and the sacrifice in the underworld, Odysseus and his men once again set out upon the open sea. But a new enemy awaited them, not swords nor storms, but a song. The sirens. These creatures had the bodies of birds and the heads of women. Their singing was so enchanting that any sailor who heard it lost his will and flung himself into the sea, desperate to reach the singing shore. Yet there awaited only death among the rocks and the bones of those who had yielded to temptation. Odysseus knew of the danger, for the prophecy had warned him. He ordered his men to plug their ears with wax, and himself to be bound to the mast. And as they sailed past the sirens, the sea filled with their enchantment. Sweet, resounding melodies promised him wisdom, glory, and a safe return home. Odysseus screamed, begged to be released, but his men ignored his pleas, remembering their pact. Thus the ship passed through the deadly temptation, and no soul was lost. The sirens, denied their prey, vanished into the sea's darkness. This episode became a symbol of mankind's struggle against temptation, powerful enough to destroy even the strongest, unless one has the strength to resist. After the sirens, Odysseus and his men sailed on, facing an even greater threat, a narrow strait between two cliffs. On one side lurked Scylla, a serpent-like monster with 6 dog heads, waiting in her cave to snatch sailors with her fanged jaws. On the other side was Charybdis, a massive whirlpool that swallowed the sea, ships, and men 3 times a day. Odysseus faced a choice: steer closer to Charybdis and risk losing the whole crew, or pass by Scylla, knowing some men would be doomed. It was not a battle of weapons, but of heart and mind. He chose Scylla, for better to lose a few than all. As the ship neared the cliffs, 6 heads darted out, seizing 6 warriors. Their screams echoed until silenced in the monster's maws. It was one of the most dreadful moments of the journey. Odysseus watched his men die, knowing it was his decision. Yet the ship passed through, spared from Charybdis's abyss. Exhausted by long trials, Odysseus's sailors finally reached an island that shone with light. This was the island of Helios, the sun god. Here grazed his sacred cattle, majestic, golden, as if woven from rays of sunlight. Tiresias and Circe had warned the hero, if his men harmed these animals, inevitable death would await them. Odysseus ordered them to avoid the trap. No one was to touch the sacred cattle. But a storm kept them on the island for many weeks. Their food supplies ran out, and the men grew weak with hunger. Odysseus prayed to the gods and even went away for some time, but it was then that the terrible thing happened. His warriors, desperate and starving, killed several of Helios's cattle and cooked the meat. When Odysseus returned and saw what had happened, it was already too late. The gods were enraged. Helios, furious over the desecration of his herd, demanded punishment from Zeus. And when the ship left the island, the gods unleashed a storm. Like lightning, Zeus's strike shattered the vessel into pieces. All perished, save one. Odysseus was left alone on the wreckage of the ship amid the boundless sea. The only one to survive Zeus's wrath, Odysseus wandered the sea for a long time until the waves cast him upon the shore of a quiet island. This was the land of the nymph Calypso. She was as beautiful as the sea itself, with long hair like waves and eyes glowing with serenity. Calypso saved the exhausted hero, nursed him back to health, and gave him shelter in her cave. She fell in love with Odysseus and offered him the chance to stay forever. "I will make you immortal," she said. "You will forget all your troubles and live with me eternally." It was an offer every mortal might dream of. Yet Odysseus's heart remained in Ithaca. He could not forget Penelope and his son. For 7 years he stayed on the island, torn between the desire for peace and the longing for home. At last, the gods intervened. By Zeus's command, Hermes came to Calypso and ordered her to release the hero. Reluctantly, but with love, she agreed. Calypso helped Odysseus build a raft, gave him provisions and her blessing. And so the hero set out once more into the unknown sea, this time closer than ever to his long-awaited Ithaca. After long years of wandering, the sea at last carried Odysseus to the shores of Phaeacia, the land of wise and hospitable seafarers. Exhausted but alive, he was found by Princess Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous. She led him to the palace, where Odysseus was given food, clothing, and the chance to rest. The Phaeacians were famed for their ships and their love of songs. During a banquet, when the bards sang of the Trojan War, Odysseus could not hold back his tears. His soul, filled with memories and pain, could no longer hide the truth. Then the hero revealed himself. He spoke his name and told of all his wanderings, from Troy to the island of Calypso. The Phaeacians were deeply moved by his tales. They saw before them not only a warrior, but a man who had endured all the trials of fate yet preserved his courage and a heart filled with love for his homeland. Grateful for his honesty and inspired by his bravery, they promised to help him reach Ithaca. On their swift ship, they set out with Odysseus on his final journey home. And so, after 20 years of war and wandering, Odysseus at last set foot on the land of Ithaca. Yet his journey was not over. The goddess Athena, who had always secretly aided the hero, cloaked him in the guise of an old beggar so he could return unnoticed. Ithaca had changed. In his palace dwelt suitors who sought Penelope's hand and the throne. They feasted at another man's table, mocked his faithful wife, and humiliated his son Telemachus. With pain in his heart, Odysseus looked upon his land, defiled by strangers. Yet he did not rush into battle. Wisely he revealed himself to his son, shared the truth, and together with a few loyal servants, began to prepare for the final and most important fight. Before the hero stood a task no less daunting than all the monsters and gods he had faced: to restore the honor of his house, drive out his enemies, and prove that he was indeed the true king of Ithaca.